AC/DC wasn't just loud, they were explosive. By the time the 1980s rolled in, their high-voltage shows and no-rules attitude had made them kings of rock. Then came July 1980, when they dropped Back in Black, an album so powerful it sold over 50 million copies and became the best-selling rock record in history. But behind the screaming guitars and stadium anthems was a story no one really knew. Because Back in Black wasn't just a comeback, it was a tribute born from grief. And now, at 70, Angus Young is finally pulling back the curtain on the tragic, raw, and graphic truth behind the album that shook the world. How was AC/DC formed? AC/DC didn't come out of nowhere. They blasted out of Australia's rock scene in the early 70s, a time when most local bands were trying, and failing, to make it big overseas. While others faded out, AC/DC came in swinging with a raw sound and something to prove. In November 1973, teenage brothers Malcolm and Angus Young decided to start their own band in Sydney. They teamed up with drummer Colin Burgess, bassist Larry Van Crete, and singer Dave Evans. Malcolm and Evans had played together before in a local group called Velvet Underground, not the American one, while Angus had been jamming with friends in a short-lived band called Tantrum. The band's name? That came from their sister Margaret, who pointed to the AC/DC label on her sewing machine. It stood for alternating current/direct current, and it just felt right. It matched their energy. Loud, charged, and straight to the point. Australians would soon nickname them Aka Daka, and that lightning bolt between the letters would become one of the most recognizable symbols in rock. Their first gig was on New Year's Eve 1973 at Sydney's Checkers nightclub. Back then, they were still figuring out who they were. Angus tried out different stage costumes: Zorro, a gorilla, even Superman, until Margaret had a better idea. Why not wear a school uniform? That stuck. The image of Angus duck-walking across the stage in shorts and a blazer would soon become iconic. In early shows, they played covers of Chuck Berry and the Stones, but they were also working on original material. In January 1974, they recorded their first studio session, produced by Malcolm and Angus's older brother George Young, along with Harry Vanda from the Easy Beats. Songs like Can I Sit Next to You Girl and Rockin' in the Parlor were early glimpses of what was coming, but the lineup wasn't built to last. Burgess was kicked out after passing out drunk during a show. Van Crete was replaced soon after. A few more members came and went before the band found something more solid. In July 1974, they released Can I Sit Next to You Girl as their debut single, and it made it into the Australian Top 50. By mid-1974, AC/DC was starting to make noise. Their live shows were loud, wild, and impossible to ignore. They even scored an opening slot on Lou Reed's national tour. Around this time, Malcolm switched to rhythm guitar, while Angus took over on lead, roles they stuck with for the rest of their careers. That year, Melbourne promoter Michael Browning caught one of their shows. He wasn't a fan of their glam rock style or Dave Evans's vocals, but the Young brothers' guitar work blew him away. A few weeks later, Malcolm called him in a panic. The band was stranded in Adelaide, broke, and without a manager. Browning stepped in. By the end of 1974, everything changed. Browning became their new manager. The glam rock look was out. They were going full pub rock, loud, fast, and unfiltered. That also meant Dave Evans was out. He didn't match the sound or the energy they were chasing. AC/DC was ready for the next step. What came next would take them far beyond Australia and straight into rock history. Angus Young's tough childhood. Before he became the school uniform-wearing force behind AC/DC's thunderous sound, Angus Young was just a quiet kid growing up on the streets of Glasgow. Born on March 31, 1955 in Scotland's tough Cranhill district, Angus McKinnon Young was the youngest of 8 children in a working-class family that knew all about hard times. His father, William, worked odd jobs, from machine operator to postman, after serving in World War II as a flight engine mechanic. His mother, Margaret, was a homemaker. Cranhill wasn't exactly a playground, it was rough. Angus learned to hold his own early, not just with a guitar, but with his fists. He once got hit by a car on the street. Tough places raise tough kids. But inside their modest home at 6 Scaryvore Road, something else was growing. Music. It ran deep in the young blood. His brother Stephen played piano and accordion. His sister Margaret loved music passionately. John played guitar. Alexander, one of the more musically gifted, would go on to tour Europe. George and Malcolm, of course, would later become rock legends in their own right. Angus picked up a guitar by age 5 or 6, learning his first chords from Alexander. That was his only formal lesson. The rest, he taught himself, alone, locked away in his room, fingers on strings, ear to the amp. In true Angus fashion, he even restrung a banjo to play like a guitar. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Then came a turning point. In 1963, Scotland was hit by one of its worst winters in history. Cold, poor, and desperate for a better life, the young family took a leap. Lured by Australian government ads promising assisted migration, they packed up and flew across the world to Sydney. Angus was just 8. They stayed at Villawood Migrant Hostel, metal Nissan huts that later became part of an immigration detention center. But something special happened there. George met another young migrant named Harry Vanda, sparking a friendship and eventually a music partnership that would shape Australian rock. The Youngs settled into a small semi-detached house at 4 Burleigh Street in the Sydney suburb of Burwood. Angus enrolled at Burwood Public School, later attending Ashfield Boys High, where the only class he enjoyed was art. He dropped out at 15. While other kids chased football dreams or academic success, Angus came home every day and shut the door to his room, lost in his guitar. After leaving school, he bounced between odd jobs, working night shifts in a butcher shop and apprenticing as a printer. At one point, a soft adult magazine, Ribald, briefly operated in the same print shop. Though rumors flew, Angus simply set some type. He never worked for the magazine. Still, it's the kind of detail that fits the legend. His first guitar? A battered acoustic his mother bought secondhand. His first real love? A secondhand 1967 Gibson SG that cost him his first few paychecks. "I played it until it got wood rot from all the sweat," Angus once said, the whole neck warped. Before AC/DC, Angus wasn't idle. He joined a short-lived band called Kentucky, alongside Bob McGlynn, John Stevens, and Trevor James. After the lineup shifted, it was renamed Tantrum. But the real spark came when he and Malcolm joined forces with George and Harry Vanda in a studio-only project called Marcus Hook Roll Band. It gave the Young brothers their first taste of recording life, and the album Tales of Old Granddaddy was born. Highly controversial AC/DC moments. AC/DC is undoubtedly one of the biggest bands to ever hit the stage. Since their early days in the 1970s, these Australian rockers have become a global force, delivering hits like Highway to Hell, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, and Thunderstruck. Even if someone has never seen them live, they've probably heard their music blasting at sports events, on classic rock stations, or in movies. Their sound is loud, electric, and unforgettable. But along with the fame came the controversy. From accusations of satanic messages to being linked with a notorious serial killer, AC/DC has stirred up more than just guitar riffs over the years. While their scandals might not reach the wild heights of bands like Mötley Crüe, the stories that follow them have been enough to shake headlines and rile up parents, politicians, and protesters alike. One of the first major controversies hit with the release of Highway to Hell in 1979. It was a massive success, especially in the US, but not everyone was cheering. The album's title and cover sparked fear among religious groups during the height of the Satanic Panic, a time when many believed rock music was filled with hidden evil messages meant to corrupt young minds. Years later, Angus Young said the band had no idea people would react like that. In an interview with Total Guitar, he explained that Australia didn't have that kind of Puritan mindset, so the outrage caught them by surprise. He also recalled how their label got nervous about the album's title. The moment that really stunned him, though, was when protesters showed up outside their concert. He asked who they were protesting and was told, "You." People even claimed that if you played the record backwards, you'd hear satanic messages. Angus said he couldn't believe it. He joked that there was no need to play it backwards because the title said it all right up front. Then came something darker. In 1991, while touring their album The Razor's Edge, AC/DC played a sold-out show at the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, Utah. The concert had general admission tickets only. No assigned seats, just thousands of fans rushing for the best spot. That night, as the crowd surged toward the stage, chaos broke out. A stampede started. By the end of the night, 3 teenagers were dead. The band was devastated. They wanted to stop the show, but authorities asked them to keep playing to avoid stirring up the crowd even more. Afterward, frontman Brian Johnson said what hurt the most was the media coverage. He recalled how the next day, newspapers ran headlines claiming the band played on while fans were dying and even showed a photo of him smiling on stage. Johnson said he was angry and heartbroken, calling it a cruel misrepresentation that crossed the line. The families of 2 victims later sued both AC/DC and Salt Lake County, and the cases were quietly settled out of court. But that wasn't the only time the band found itself in headlines for the wrong reasons. In 1985, AC/DC's name was dragged into one of the most chilling crime stories in American history, though not by any choice of their own. During the investigation into serial killer Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, police found a key piece of evidence: an AC/DC cap left at a crime scene. When Ramirez was caught, it was revealed that he often listened to the band's music. That was all it took for certain media outlets to start drawing dangerous conclusions. The song Night Prowler, a moody track from Highway to Hell, became the target. Commentators began to suggest that the lyrics had influenced Ramirez, calling the band satanic and pushing the idea that their music had inspired his crimes. Malcolm Young later told VH1's Behind the Music that the rumors were absurd. He said Night Prowler was simply about sneaking into a girlfriend's room after her parents went to bed. Not about murder, but the damage was done. Despite the truth, many people believed the worst. Brian Johnson also spoke out about the unwanted connection. He said it made him sick to think that their name could be tied to something so horrific. On top of it all, AC/DC has also taken hits for their lyrics. Many critics have called their songs sexist or misogynistic, pointing out the way women are often portrayed in their music. Their lyrics often center around partying and sex, with videos like Play Ball featuring half-naked women for no real reason other than shock and appeal. Even Kurt Cobain wasn't a fan of their lyrical content. According to his former manager Danny Goldberg, Cobain enjoyed AC/DC's music but couldn't support what they sang about. But for AC/DC, it was never that deep. Angus Young once told the Los Angeles Times that the band's music was meant to be cheeky and fun, not offensive. He said people had lost their sense of humor and described the band as naughty little boys, not villains. Love them or hate them, one thing's clear. A C/DC has always done things their own way. And even through the outrage, the lawsuits, and the headlines, they've kept the amps on, the guitars loud, and the fans coming back for more. But being linked to serial killers isn't the awful thing that has been linked to the band. In 1993, their manager died under really mysterious circumstances. Whatever happened to AC/DC's manager? Not all of AC/DC's drama played out on stage. Behind the amps and roaring guitars, the band has seen tragedy, crime, and chaos that read more like a rock and roll thriller than real life. Crispin Dye, who managed AC/DC for 7 years during the Fly on the Wall era, was a key part of their machine in the 1980s. But in 1993, Dye became the center of a dark mystery. On December 23rd, he went out to celebrate the release of his own solo album. The night ended in horror. Dye was viciously attacked on the street, suffering fatal head injuries. He died 2 days later on Christmas, at just 41 years old. For years, police struggled to find his killer. A $100,000 reward was offered, and theories swirled. Some believed it was a hate crime, while others thought it was a simple robbery. His wallet had been taken. For decades, that was as far as the case went. No suspects, no closure. Then, in 2023, something finally broke. As part of a new investigation into historic LGBTQ hate crimes, police tested Dye's clothing for DNA, something they shockingly had never done before. A match came back. The DNA belonged to a man linked to another violent crime in 2002, known in the inquiry only as NP-252. But the twist? He was already dead. Once again, the case stalled. Dye's murder remains unsolved, and the real motive is still a mystery. But Dye's story isn't the only dark chapter in AC/DC's legacy. In 2014, longtime drummer Phil Rudd was arrested in New Zealand, and the charges were almost too wild to believe. He had tried to hire a hitman to kill 2 people. The motive? Rage over how poorly his solo album had performed. Investigators discovered that he had contacted someone, hoping to have his personal assistant taken out. Drugs were also found during the arrest. In court, Rudd pleaded guilty. The result was 8 months of house arrest and a quick boot from the band. Chris Slade stepped in to replace him for the tour. Behind the scenes, things hadn't been smooth for a while. Angus Young later shared that even during recording, it was difficult to get Rudd to show up. He had also skipped video shoots and promo events without a word. AC/DC's history hasn't just been shaped by arrests and tragedy. It's also been filled with rock and roll madness that could only belong to a band like this. Michael Browning, who managed the band during their early years, had a front-row seat to the chaos, especially when it came to lead singer Bon Scott. In his book, Dog Eat Dog, Browning shared wild stories from the road, including a moment that still left him shaking his head. At one point, Scott had a bad drug trip that landed him in the hospital. When Browning visited him the next day, Scott was already joking around with nurses. He casually mentioned that the last time he'd been in a hospital, it was to visit 2 different women, both of whom were having his babies. Whether those kids ever met or even know about each other is unclear. What was clear, though, was that Scott wasn't just a frontman. He was a whirlwind. Browning described him as a rock star in every sense of the word, charming, chaotic, and constantly living on the edge. But before Bon Scott started his wild lifestyle, he was just a little kid from the Melbourne suburb of Sunshine, Victoria. How Bon Scott brought magic to AC/DC. Long before AC/DC became one of the loudest forces in rock history, they found their true voice in a wild, charismatic frontman named Bon Scott. Born Ronald Belford Scott on July 9, 1946, in Forfar, Scotland, Bon didn't stay in one place for long. At just 6 years old, he and his family left the grey skies of Scotland behind and moved to Australia. After a few years in Melbourne, they finally settled in Fremantle, Western Australia, a city that would help shape the rock legend he would become. Scott wasn't just born to sing, he was built for the stage. He started his first band, the Spectres, in 1964, working the drums and occasionally stepping up to the mic. One band led to another, and he eventually found himself performing with the Valentines, and later Fraternity, carving out his place in Australia's growing rock scene. But everything changed in 1974. When AC/DC needed a new lead singer, Scott stepped in, and it was electric from the start. With his voice, cheeky grin, and live wire energy, Bon didn't just sing the songs, he owned the stage. His style was raw, wild, and dangerously charming, the perfect match for AC/DC's high-voltage sound. Between 1975 and 1979, Bon helped push AC/DC from Aussie pub rockers to the international stage. He recorded 7 albums with the band. High Voltage, first in Australia, then internationally. TNT, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap, Let There Be Rock, Powerage, and finally, the explosive Highway to Hell. That last one wasn't just an album. It was the band's big American breakthrough, crashing into the US Top 20 and proving that AC/DC was ready to take over the world. Bon's lyrics were loud, fast, and full of fire. His voice? Pure rock and roll, rough, soulful, and unforgettable. By the time Highway to Hell hit, critics and fans alike knew there was no one like him. Classic Rock magazine would later call him the greatest frontman of all time. Hit Parader ranked him 5th among the best heavy metal voices ever. But behind the leather and the swagger, Bon Scott was more than just a rock star. He was the spark that lit AC/DC's fuse, the wild heart that helped them rise from smoky bars to stadium stages. And just when they thought all was going well, life had other plans. The tragic story, Behind Back In, Black by AC/DC. AC/DC's Back in Black didn't just break records, it blew the doors off the music industry. With close to 50 million copies sold, it stands tall as the biggest rock album of all time, second only to Michael Jackson's Thriller in overall sales. But behind that juggernaut of sound is a heartbreaking story of loss, grief, and ultimately, survival. In early 1980, the band was riding a wave of momentum. Their 1979 album, Highway to Hell, their first with producer Robert John "Mutt" Lang, had cracked the UK Top 10 and US Top 20, putting them on the edge of global superstardom. After 6 hard years grinding it out in seedy clubs and beer-stained bars, AC/DC was finally graduating to stadiums. They had paid their dues, and now the payoff was within reach. Then, everything stopped. On February 19, 1980, Bon Scott, the band's larger-than-life frontman, was found dead. He had passed out drunk after a heavy night out in London and was left to sleep it off in a friend's parked car. He never woke up. The cause of death was ruled acute alcohol poisoning. Bon was just 33. His sudden death shocked everyone, but the devastation inside the band was deeper than anyone could imagine. Bon wasn't just a singer to them. He was family. Angus Young, the school uniform-wearing guitarist, had seen him as a brother, even a father figure. Losing Bon felt like losing a piece of the band's soul. Angus later reflected that the world had lost a massive talent, but to the band, it was more personal. They hadn't just lost their frontman, they'd lost someone they truly loved. He confessed that, in those early days, they didn't even know how to begin picking up the pieces. Replacing Bon wasn't even a thought. Their grief was too raw. When AC/DC's manager Peter Mensch approached the Young brothers with a short list of potential singers, Malcolm Young couldn't even look at it. He waved it away in disgust. Nothing about it felt right. They returned to London and just sat. Not recording, not performing, just sitting with their grief. Then something shifted. Malcolm called Angus one day with a suggestion. "Let's work. No pressure, no labels, no expectations. Just write. Just play." It was a way to heal and to stay together. The plan worked. The music became therapy. Bit by bit, they started writing new songs. Not to replace Bon, but to honor him. And somewhere deep down, both brothers remembered something Bon's father had told them at the funeral in Australia. Charles "Chick" Scott had looked them in the eye and urged them to keep going. He said they were too close to greatness to stop now, so they didn't stop. That decision, more than anything, defined what came next. The news began to leak. AC/DC was looking for a new frontman. Instantly, the critics pounced. Some called it too soon. Others accused the band of being cold and calculated. But the Youngs didn't care. They weren't replacing Bon, they were surviving him. The band never made a public announcement or placed ads in music papers. It was all quiet, all behind the scenes. Because finding someone who could live up to Bon's wild charisma wasn't just difficult. It was nearly impossible. They didn't want a clone. They wanted someone with their own spark. Then came the surprise. Of all the hopefuls, AC/DC chose a stocky singer in a flat cap from the northeast of England. His name? Brian Johnson, formerly of 70s glam rock band Geordie. Hardly a household name, but oddly enough, Bon himself had been a fan. Back in 1973, when Bon was touring with his old band Fraternity, they had opened for Geordie, and Bon had been blown away by Brian's voice and stage presence. Even in death, it seemed, Bon had helped guide the decision. Brian showed up for his audition on March 29, 1980, and immediately got lost. While the band waited upstairs, he was downstairs playing pool with the road crew. When they found him, something clicked. For the first time since Bon's death, the band smiled. Brian sang Whole Lotta Rosie, a classic Bon anthem celebrating a woman of 42, 39, 56 proportions, and crushed it. The band was impressed. Brian wasn't sure he got the gig and joked that if nothing else, he got a free trip to London and a good story for his mates. But he was hired. And just weeks later, AC/DC were off to Compass Point Studios in Nassau, Bahamas, to start recording what would become Back in Black. The tropical paradise wasn't exactly calm. They landed in the middle of a storm, but that energy found its way into the music. The opening lines of Hell's Bells, I'm the rolling thunder, the pouring rain, I'm coming on like a hurricane, were born straight out of those stormy nights. Malcolm recalled working through the evenings, rum and coconut milk in hand, writing lyrics under flickering lights. Despite the chaos, the album came together fast. In just 6 weeks, they had it. Producer Mutt Lange, known for his perfectionist streak, helped shape the sound, just as he had on Highway to Hell. After Bon's passing, Mutt could have walked away, but he didn't. Angus said it meant a lot that Mutt still believed in the band and wanted to help them rebuild. A rumor has floated around for years that Back in Black's lyrics were taken from Bon's old notebooks. Angus shut that down. He confirmed that while some ideas were in place before Brian joined, none of the lyrics came from Bon's writing. This album was new, but still deeply rooted in memory. Brian barely had time to take in what he was doing. Mutt had him recording in small bursts, a chorus here, a verse there. When it was over, he walked outside, lit a cigarette, and finally exhaled. He hadn't even heard the full songs yet, but he knew he'd just been part of something big. Back in Black dropped in the US on July 21, 1980, and hit #1 in the UK 10 days later. In America, it peaked at #4, staying on the charts for 131 straight weeks. That's 2.5 years. The album cover was completely black, and the record began with the toll of a giant funeral bell. It was loud, it was fierce, it was AC/DC, and it was Bon's farewell. Looking back, Angus doesn't dwell on the sales or awards. What makes him proud is that they didn't fall apart. They held on. They pulled through the darkest chapter in their lives and turned it into something eternal. Back in Black wasn't just an album. It was a resurrection, a salute, a scream into the void saying, "We're still here, and we're doing this for him." Whether Bon Scott is raising hell or riding lightning somewhere in the great beyond, there's no question that he would have been proud. Were you ever a fan of AC/DC, and did you like the Back in Black album? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.